There can be no doubt at this moment in time that there is no reason for anyone to support Russia. The only two reasons I will give anyone is either A, you are just completely stupid in this case, backing blatant Russian aggression and swallowing straight up Russian propaganda, or you are in the case of who we are about to cover today. This is George Galloway, who, well, just happens to take quite a bit of money from Russia today. And bear in mind, this is a YouTube channel. It's not even a very big political YouTube channel in the grand scale of things. Oh, yes, he has a lot of subscribers, but make no mistake, the George Galloway YouTube channel is really small potatoes when it comes to a lot of other YouTube channels. And to say that George Galloway claimed just a few days ago in our live stream that he was not being paid by Russia or he's not backing Russia, it's kind of strange that somehow George Galloway manages to swing an interview with a deputy ambassador from Russia. That's pretty darn suspicious if you ask me. But what you are again essentially about to see is a propaganda exercise, and I think it's very worth going over this because, well, I've said it before, Galloway here is a Putin puppy, and he is very clearly wagging his dog for Mr. Putin. And of course, I have to draw attention, of course, to what was it in the Second World War? Was it Lord Hee-Haw? I believe the name was. And we all know what happened to him, of course. But now, if I wouldn't like, shall we say, like that to happen to Mr. Galloway, I think that certainly maybe Mr. Galloway himself should maybe be sanctioned in some way, shape, or form. Might be quite appropriate, to be honest. So, let's go diving into this to find out what this ambassador has to say. And remember, this is straight up Russian propaganda. So, before we do go jumping into this, and like I say, it's going to be possibly a bit of a long one today, but again, needs must, as they say sometimes. Like I say, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-up donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to those people who do support the channel that way. So let's get on with this.
Dmitry Polyansky, the Deputy Ambassador for Russia to the United Nations. Excellency, welcome to the show. Sorry, we're a little late.
Excellency. Seems to be setting the... Well, at least you know where he stands straight away on this.
In getting to you, I wonder if we can start in what was breaking news, at least an hour or so ago. May have been overtaken by events on the ground, but one understood from the breaking news about an hour or two ago that the government of France was seeking to broker a ceasefire, followed by a summit at the highest level to save the peace in Europe. Are you able to tell us anything about that?
I think there was
I think that time has well and truly passed by this point.
Official press release about this meeting on the website of President of Russia. And I know that there were speculations about something else, and they were not confirmed from our side. But indeed, France, as a member of Normandy Group, bears special responsibility for the behavior of our Ukrainian neighbors. So if France has certain tools...
Wait, how... France somehow bears responsibility for the actions of the Ukrainian neighbor. Once again, filling into the very bizarre phenomenon of that somehow, in some way, that Russia has been forced to invade Ukraine because of a third party. Again, I keep on telling you, it's blatant Russian propaganda, and there are idiots falling for it.
To influence them and to convince them that they should get in dialogue with their own citizens in the East, that would be a very good scenario.
I'm sure you were too busy to listen to my opening remarks, but included in them was quoting the head of the Moscow bureau, whatever or wherever that is, of the Carnegie Foundation, that it's quite clear that these wicked Russians are seeking to coerce the government of Ukraine to implement the Minsk agreements.
Yes. We've talked about before about how these Minsk agreements, especially Minsk 1, was sort of quite fair in creating these still being a part of Ukraine but having a level of autonomy. And then Minsk 2 just went full bore and was very, very pro-Russian. Indeed. And remember, Russia signed up to these Minsk agreements, and Russia was almost immediately the first group to break these agreements because, hey, in Minsk 2, which said we want to see a level of, de-escalation from you, Russia didn't de-escalate.
That's a very odd formulation, as one imagines that when one signs an agreement, there is no further need for coercion to implement it. And if there is, the co-signatories to it are the ones who should be doing the coercing.
Russia broke the Minsk agreements, both of them.
Absolutely, but I don't think it's even okay to speak about any coercing. I think that implementing this agreement is in the best interest of Ukraine. If Ukraine wants to remain a sovereign country and in control of.
If Ukraine wants to remain a sovereign country, well, my word, my word, you heard it here. Again, Russia very clearly still spelling out its intent that it intends to very much end Ukraine. And again, as I've said, massive support to the Ukrainian armed forces, doing incredibly well, holding the line against Russia. Now, it is the unfortunate fact and reality that sooner or later they will fall. But quite frankly, the more time they buy, every hour, every minute, every day is far more valuable time. And the more time that the West can send aid, organize responses, and then, of course, moves into the guerrilla campaign, where we are seeing that the will of the Ukrainian people to still fight on is going to be incredibly strong.
Whatever happens on its territory. This was behind the Minsk agreements, and it is, as I already said, the backbone of this agreement is direct dialogue with the people in the East, because lack of this dialogue, ignorance of what they wanted after the illegal Maidan coup in 2014.
It was not an illegal coup. It was not an illegal coup. The guy was voted out by a massive majority, even by his own party. The infamous, you can look up the video of where he loses the vote of no confidence. The guy literally snaps the pen in two.
Was the core of all the problems that Ukraine faced immediately after Maidan, both with Crimea or with the east of Ukraine.
If I were the interviewer here, I would think it my journalistic responsibility to bring up the fact that Russia has been sponsoring and funding these separatists. And he's very much responsible for these separatists. They are responsible for that situation.
unless Ukraine engages in the dialogue, meaningful dialogue, unless Ukraine is ready to take everybody on board in one state and listen to their preoccupations, nothing good will happen for this country. That's why the Minsk agreements was designed. So I don't think anybody needs to coerce.
Who broke the Minsk agreements? Might be worth, again, if you were a honest reporter, George, might be worth maybe asking him why Russia broke the Minsk agreement to begin with by, you know, annexing Crimea in a very, very suspicious referendum where the month before about 41% of the population said they wanted to rejoin Russia, and then miraculously a month later 95.5% said we want to rejoin Russia. Incredibly suspicious, George. I think you maybe want to be bringing that up with this guy.
Ukraine in doing so. It's in the best interest of Ukrainians themselves.
Well, of course, dialogue and indeed recognition of the autonomy of the so-called People's Republics in the east of the country is what the Minsk Agreement was about. But it also required...
Again, it would have given them a level of autonomy, but you look at, again, the population map of sort of the Russian people there compared to Crimea. Crimea was a lot more people considered themselves Russian. You look at these those again republics, a far more smaller population.
A ceasefire on the borderline, and also the absence of foreign force.
We have had constant throughout all these years. Again, the ceasefire has been constantly broken by the separatists trying to force the Ukrainians into retaliation. Then they can try and get more justification to try and get Russia to come in and get involved. And again, what we have seen today, and especially the hours leading up to the invasion before, was again Russia and even the separatists again trying to force the Ukrainians to react, to give them a justification to go to war. But of course, they really didn't need one because they were going to go, the Russians were going to go to war anyway.
Forces from the area, neither of which is happening. Now, I've just, during the break for the news, looked on social media. It appears that there is a major offensive now going on, launched by the government forces against.
That is a blatant lie. George Galloway has said that Ukraine launched a major offensive against those breakaway regions. There was no such offensive. There was no such offensive. That is a straight up lie. He is right now propagandizing his audience. Of how many views has this video had? About 26,000 views this video has had. That is a straight up lie he has said. That offensive never happened. Because if it did happen, Russia would be all over it. They'd be using that as a massive propaganda push. No, this is why we went into Ukraine. That never happened.
The people of the Donbass and of the independent areas. Can you confirm that?
Well, we receive a lot of news, of course, about ongoing...
Yes, can you confirm this piece of Russian propaganda that I'm maybe not paid to ask you? What do you think the answer is going to be? What do you think the answer is going to be?
Shelling and explosions on the territory of the on the territory controlled by the republics. We also have our own sources of information. We have a lot of relatives and friends. They all say that the situation is very dangerous and precarious, and that the evacuation of peaceful population, primarily women, children, and elderly, is underway. A lot of them are leaving these territories. As for the men, they are joining as volunteers if they, of course, want to.
They were forcibly conscripted. those men were not volunteers. They were forcefully conscripted. That is a war crime, my friends.
The military detachments, so people there are absolutely ready to defend their land and to stop Ukraine from destroying it.
So what do you think the end game is? I've said from the beginning that Russia will not invade Ukraine, but Ukraine might very well invade the ethnically Russian population of the eastern part of their country. And if that happens, Russia will have no choice but to try to protect and save those people. You're speaking for a state. I'm speaking only.
That is, again, Russian state Putin propaganda. That is the justification they have given for starting this war. We are going in there to denazify and stop this apparent genocide that is going on. Again, you'd think that if you really wanted to justify this war and you were Russia and you had evidence that there was actual serious genocide going on here, you maybe want to start broadcasting all these pictures and proof that, again, Russia says they have, but just hasn't quite shown it. Kind of suspicious and says everything about it. But George Galloway, straight up repeating this Russian propaganda, he is disseminating Russian propaganda straight up. I think George Galloway should be sanctioned. I absolutely think George Galloway should be sanctioned over this.
For myself, but the pressure on Russia to defend its co-religionists, its compatriots, would be irresistible. It would be ineluctably that would happen, no?
And that is why Ukraine did not do that offensive, because Ukraine did not want to get invaded. Now, unfortunately, obviously, it has been invaded, but it did not want to do that. It knew what would happen in that case. And bear in mind, at this point, those Russian troops were sent into the rebel-controlled areas in Donbass. So Ukraine not wanting to start a war here, again, complete lie that there was this massive offensive by the Ukrainians in this area. And again, him spouting propaganda, of course, that this is the correct, casus belli for war that we've got here. Again, he's a straight up Russian propagandist at this point.
Let's not engage in some kind of speculation, because I think that the people there during the 7 years of conflict, they have enough of resources to withstand Ukrainian attack on their.
Yep, because they were surprised a lot by Russia. And of course, there are a lot of, shall we say, what are known as little green men in that area. A long time.
Their own. Again, it's only hypothetical scenario, but they have accumulated enough of experience and training, combat agility to do so.
Where did they get that training? Again, if you were a responsible journalist having a talk with the Russian UN ambassador, might be probably worth a question to ask.
So we'll see, but of course the scenario that I described is very bad, and we would like to avoid this scenario. We hope that Ukraine will have enough common sense to remain within the framework of Minsk agreements, to agree to ceasefire, of course, and also to implement Minsk agreements, all the provisions you mentioned about autonomy, but it's not the autonomy, it's a special status of Donbass that should be implemented into Ukrainian legislation as one of the major moves.
Again, we've stated this very, very clearly before. What would happen? What would go forward was this special status would be created. Russia would fund more separatists in that area, that region. That area would then suddenly hold a referendum saying, we want to be part of Russia. And again, it would probably go down exactly like it happened in Ukraine, with miraculously about 95.5% of the people saying that they want to be part of Russia. Quite suspicious, that, I'd say.
On the way to implement Minsk agreements, elections need to take place. And there are a lot of provisions in this document which are happening one after another. And the end result, if Ukraine does everything that it is written there, and the population of Donbass is agreeing with this, would be re-establishment of Ukrainian control over the border. But Ukrainians usually try to start from this last point to put it on top of everything, saying that they need to control the border first and foremost. So this is a very complicated situation.
Yes, they do, because I'd agree with them with that, because they need to control that border, because Russia has been constantly sending them weapons and equipment to help fund this separatist rebellion movement. I sort of can't blame Ukraine for wanting to control the border first so that they can stop those flow of weapons in. Can't really blame them.
And of course, Ukraine makes it much more complicated and dangerous for everybody. And given the fact that our Western colleagues are trying to put a blind eye to what's happening in the East, they are from the outset denying that Ukraine is shelling these territories, implying that everything that is happening there would be the result of Russian provocation. Of course, with such an emboldening, it is very risky, and it is very possible that some people in Ukraine would have the temptation of provoking the rebels, provoking these territories, and we don't know.
Why would they want to do that? Why would they want to provoke this? If they know full well that if they provoked these rebels, that immediately Russia would immediately come, and we've seen obviously the how very patient and very well disciplined the Ukrainians were in not responding to the provocation of these separatists, or should we say Russian-backed separatists, to give them their proper moniker.
What may be the consequences yet. So if our French colleagues can influence the minds of Ukrainian establishment and to convince them that they should stick to Minsk agreements and that they should not open fire at peaceful populations in Donbass, that could be only welcome.
I'm going to speed this
Now,
up.
this is all a very big tragedy for much of the life of the former Soviet Union. There were Ukrainians in the highest levels, including the highest level, not once but twice, in the leadership of the Soviet Union, Khrushchev and Brezhnev. And also, of course, the sacrifice made by the...
Again, this is Russian propaganda. The whole thing trying to state the idea that Ukraine isn't a separate country, it's one of us. Again, repeating the whole Putin line of Ukraine has adopted foreign ideas of democracy, and they've betrayed their blood. Again, Galloway here, well, I hope he's going to get a good payday from Russia for this. That's all I can hope. And like I say, I definitely think and would encourage, if you are in the UK, to send a letter to a member of Parliament asking them what they intend to do about George Galloway, who is broadcasting straight up Russian propaganda.
Heroes in Ukraine as part of the Red Army, as part of the partisans behind the Nazi lines, real heroism in the great.
I guarantee we're now going to get into, it's Ukraine's just full of Nazis. It's a far-right government. This is what he's setting up.
Patriotic war from Ukrainian people. Of course, there was collaboration, and there were Nazi sympathizers who quickly became Nazis as soon as they could.
What did I tell
you?
The
great majority of the Ukrainian people were a fraternal people of the Russians. I feel extremely sad about all of this. How has it felt in Russia?
I think it's even more sad for us to see what's happening. But the problem is that there is very loud and powerful minority in Ukraine that is now on the top of the country and that dictates to the others.
Yep. Told you exactly what was coming. Predicted it. Again, more Russian propaganda that, oh my God, the Ukraine's controlled by a far-right government. Again, these far-right parties in total got about less than 2% of the vote, which again, far-right parties get more than 2% of the vote in some other Western European countries. Is the UK far right? Is Denmark far right? Is Switzerland far right? Again, you could just apply this argument to just say the entire entirety of Europe is full of these far right parties controlling the population when they get so little amount of the vote. Again, this is blatant, straight up Russian propaganda, and yet so many leftists have been towing this line.
The way that they should deal with the history issues, which is not shared by majority of population in Ukraine. That's quite clear. We see it from opinion polls. We see it from our context. We still have a lot of friends and relatives there in Ukraine, and they try to monopolize the public discourse of in Ukraine about these issues. You may have known that 6 opposition channels have been shut down, and the key leader of the opposition is now under arrest. So apparently the repressions are very.
I think that's false. Bear in mind, this is a Russian ambassador saying this. I can pretty much probably think that is false. I can pretty much say with 100% confidence that is a false claim, and yet more Russian propaganda to say, oh, Ukraine's controlled by a far-right cabal.
Energetic now in Ukraine. So people are afraid. People are visibly afraid to speak out, to say things that they really feel, because this regime that came to power in 2014 has proved itself to be very bloody and very aggressive. It's enough to remember the tragedy in Odessa in 2014 when 40 people were burnt alive only for trying to make their point clear. Actually, Donbass is the best example of this, when people wanted.
Again, he's saying, oh, look at all these genocides that happened. Look at all these atrocities. Where's the evidence? You'd think that if these atrocities happened, they'd be showing them left, right, and center on their news channels and stuff constantly, but they're not, because they never happened.
To talk, people in the East, not only in these republics, but also in other southeast cities, wanted to discuss how they would live in one country with the people who came to power. But instead of speaking with them, these people came with arms and planes and shellings, and that's.
Let's set the stage. The Euromaidan, revolution did not just go, right, we've got power now. We're now going to send all these troops and weapons to start brutally repressing the eastern part of the country. That's not what happened. Russia started to back separatist groups in eastern Ukraine. They were the first ones to start this. They were the ones to start this with the weapons. There was nothing going on until Putin started to fund and back these separatists with funds and weaponry.
It's happening right now in other places. In some other places, people are maybe just waiting, intimidated, well.
Considering how much social media we've been seeing for the past couple of days from Ukraine, why aren't all these apparent, anti-Ukrainian government people showing their social media about all these, again, apparent tragedies and them being afraid to speak out? That's not what's been happening. Again, it's more blatant Russian propaganda of, oh, well, we've had to invade Ukraine to, again, denazify it.
They can't be, of course, happy about what's happening, not only in history terms, but also in the usage of Russian language, which is a native language, mother tongue to a big majority of Ukrainian population. But as you know, it is banned, and people are being fined for speaking Ukrainian. And the law that is in force already now is gradually making these fines more and more important. So all this,
again, they want to promote their own mother tongue. They're fine to do that, by the way. I also, by the way, don't see Russia having a big problem with this happening in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, who also have very similar laws because they, again, want to promote their own native language after years of very brutal oppression of Russia doing the exact same thing, but even probably more brutally, especially in the case, of course, of the Soviet Union occupation when these countries were again occupied. Of course, George doesn't bring that up again because he's a Russian propagandist.
Atmosphere, of course, creates a situation when people in the West, in the Western countries, they simply do not understand what's happening in Ukraine because they try to pick up information from those who are in power, from the establishment, from those loud minority, much of which has been formed and financed by the West in the previous years before Maidan. But they don't know what really the population feels and what it really wants from all this situation.
The population has been very, very clear. Why are you invading us? Why are you doing this, Russia? What on earth are you doing? Go home. We do not want you here. We will fight you to the death if necessary to defend our sovereignty. That is the message currently of the Ukrainian people. And I think they are sending that message very, very loud and clear, especially in some cases at the point of a javelin missile.
And the population is, of course, sick and tired of war. Population is sick and tired of these authorities that are banning everything that is dear to them. So I think that you need to take into consideration this picture when you analyze the situation in Ukraine. And this picture is absolutely obscure for our Western colleagues. They have in mind some kind of a modern, democratic, progressive country. They don't want to notice the corruption there. They don't want to notice the oligarchs. They don't want to notice all the things that I just mentioned to you. And maybe...
Heaven forfend that we should point out, Russian oligarchs. Again, if you were an interviewer, might want to bring that up with the Russian ambassador, with Russian oligarchs, probably the most famous use before oligarchs is Russian. So, might want to bring that up, George.
They prefer to be comfortably numb in this situation, but that doesn't change the deepness of the problems for our neighbors.
There's a few of them in the bank details of Credit Suisse, which has just broken here in England and repays some study, Excellency. Now, the proximate reason for this crisis is Ukraine, but the Ukraine issue is located in the absolute failure to respect these.
Here we go, the NATO excuse. It's coming. I know I've been covering this again for a while now. I already know what's coming. It's NATO. It's NATO. Ooh, that dastardly NATO.
Security needs of Russia vis-a-vis NATO as a whole, and NATO is steadily recruiting and encroaching, getting ever closer, in fact, to Moscow. And the Russian government has said there are red lines here, and we have security demands that must be acknowledged and must be negotiated. So this is part of a bigger crisis.
What about Ukraine's security and their right to join NATO? Because they were, again, now rightly very worried about, and even more justified, about the blatant act of Russian aggression and being invaded by Ukraine, and their country essentially being forced in and turned into now a puppet state of Russia.
And that's why Britain and America, and also some others, are currently, right now, I mean, the German airspace is full of American planes. Right now, someone just told me, who's working in the German ministry concerned. This is all very alarming, because that's not a local war in a part of Ukraine. That's a European war that is in danger of breaking out. A European war which could involve even the use of nuclear weapons. This is a deeply alarming prospect. Do you think any of the governments in Europe are alarmed, or is it just the people?
Again, I sympathize with anyone who is worried about the prospect of nuclear war. I do sympathize with that. But at this moment in time, we have to stand with Ukraine. You know, Ukraine, we got your back on this. And we will do everything we possibly can. And the fact that your army is doing an absolutely stand-up job at the moment. Now, the fortunate fact is they will soon or later be just swarmed by the military might that is the Russian state against them. But the very fact that they are fighting so effectively, and again, every hour they buy, well, every minute they buy, every hour they buy, every day they buy to delay Russia is fantastic news, and should quite frankly be celebrated, because it again shows the Russian people that they are wrong on this, and that this is again going to be another Afghanistan situation for them, as it was in the 60s, and that this occupation that they are going to encounter is going to be very, very brutal for them. And again, I would definitely support the guerrilla actions, because this is, you know, a democratic country, democratically elected country, standing up for their sovereignty and their rights, fighting back against a fascist state.
Well, I think they must be alarmed. They must be mindful of what's happening. But of course, they are having wrong perception of what you are telling. They think that Russia is trying to blackmail everybody, and that Russia is trying to win some kind of points because of this.
I think the events again of the last 24 hours in the speeches of Vladimir Putin have more than proven the worries of many of these Eastern European countries that joined NATO, to a point where even Finland and Sweden have now considered that maybe they actually need to join NATO as well now.
Situation. But of course, let's not take the hypothetical scenarios of European war. That's something that everybody wants to avoid, and I don't see at this point indications that could lead to this war, because we are all people of common sense in Russia and in Europe, and we all understand what is at
Not when it came to Ukraine, apparently, Russia.
Stake here. But you're absolutely right that what's happening in Ukraine is an element of a much bigger picture, and our Western colleagues sometimes they try to boil the situation down to the narrow issue of Ukraine, assuming that once the situation around Ukraine is
Georgia, again, another country, again, a victim of Russian aggression, wants to join NATO because it is terrified that that aggression is going to happen to them again. The only way that they will be protected from that is if they are in NATO. That is why they are desperately asking to join. Ukraine has been asking the same thing. And same for these other Eastern European countries. They were desperate to join NATO because of the threat of Russian aggression, which has been very blatantly and played out in this situation.
Is resolved, so then there will be no more problems in relations between Russia and the West. Ukraine is important. The crisis in Ukraine is very important for Russia and for Europe, but the picture is much bigger, and our colleagues, our neighbors in Europe should take a bigger and more in-depth optics, because indeed the Russian security concerns that we were voicing from the very beginning, it's not today that we started to voice them.
At the very beginning, NATO said, well, Ukraine's free to ask to join NATO, but France and Russia, France and Germany, had already said no. Now, of course, Ukraine is a sovereign country. They are allowed to send application to join that, but the members of NATO in this case were not unanimously aligned to obviously them joining their assent to join the pact. So they weren't going to join. They weren't essentially going to join anytime soon. So once again, I want to reiterate this whole thing, the whole reason again Putin's doing this. Oh my God, it's evil, deadly NATO doing this. No, it's just yet another very pitiful, shadowy excuse.
Are very legitimate. They also take into account the promises, the oral promises that were given to us during the period when Soviet.
Hey, you know what? Maybe next time get it in writing.
Union ceased to exist, and there are a lot of confirmation of these oral promises, but unfortunately they were not put on the paper.
Yep. So maybe you should have got it in writing.
It is also important to understand that we want good relations with our European colleagues, and we were from the very beginning. I'm not speaking about NATO now. I'm speaking about European Union rather. We were speaking from the beginning of the years 2000 about some kind of common spaces that could make our cooperation with European Union, and at that time we called each other strategic partners. There was such a time, and I was working in Brussels at this time. So we were thinking about some concept.
This again idea that they started was going to involve Belarus, at the time Ukraine. But again, Ukraine wanted to join the European Union, get the advantages of again being the European Union, had been actually working towards solving a lot of their problems, trying so that they could join the European Union, being like things like the single market customs union, all those different institutions that the EU has. The Russian idea was, we are going to make a single market that makes you basically subservient to Russia, and you have to follow exactly every single word that we do. And as a result, well, Belarus joined because, well, Belarus is a dictatorship. And Ukraine, when we really don't want that. And as a result, when the Euromaidan crisis started, primarily because the guy went back on those promises that he made to, again, sign up to the European, initial agreements to start looking more west. Then came more brutal crackdowns and all sorts of stuff. And again, you can look all that up. The Euromaidan crisis was, again, very much largely peaceful. There was obviously some violence that did go on in it, but this is very much directed towards the government at that time that was heavily, brutally trying to crack down on them. And eventually what happened was that guy was voted out. Like I say, you can still watch that clip on YouTube where he literally gets voted out and he literally snaps the pen in two. That's still there on YouTube. Even his own party voted him out.
That would allow us to cooperate to create a big common space from Lisbon to Vladivostok, and to cooperate to the benefit of all the participants within the framework of this space. And so one of the preconditions which we all shared, as we believed at this stage, was that we shouldn't put our common neighbors in the position of a choice between Russia and the European Union. And of course, Ukraine was first and foremost on our minds. So we kind of tried to.
And Ukraine said it wanted to join the European Union. That's their sovereign right to join that, to want to be and join that organization. If you're upset by that, Russia, then all you can be is be upset. And maybe you shouldn't have put forward an offer which basically went, we're pretty much going to link you and tie you economically to us, rather than, again, in the European Union, where everyone works together and it is diplomatically sorted out in the Brussels Parliament, etc., etc.
Promote this understanding. European Union was not against it in principle, but it never materialized in anything concrete. The common space of external security contained this norm, but it was not implemented in practice because the European Union started to launch the policy, first the European neighborhood policy, which was more or less okay, but then Eastern Partnership, which absolutely went to another direction. And Eastern Partnership was exactly designed to build divisive walls in the European continent and to put our neighbors in the position of choice between Russia and the EU. So I think that when we take this, we try to analyze the situation, we should...
yeah, many of those countries chose the EU, not Russia. For good reasons, by the way.
Not concentrate only on the NATO policies. We should also think about EU policies. And this is something...
Again, that's something that hasn't really, shall we say, seeded too well among the leftists, because a lot of leftists, again, all over the world, are sort of very, very pro EU and understand how it works. Again, it's not, shall we say, been bought quite very well as the NATO bit of propaganda that Russia has put out.
That should be changed in EU mentality in relations with Russia and in approaches to our common neighbors.
Excellency, thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, let's get back to this
Dimitri,
nice picture there of Galloway. That there sums everything quite up. George Galloway is a straight-up Russian propagandist, and I think because, again, he's broadcasting here from the UK, I fully believe he should be sanctioned. I think he should be definitely be looked into. I think the security services should be looking into him and seeing what his activities are, because what you just saw there was blatant Russian propagandizing. Everything that came out of his mouth was basically ultimately pro-Russian. That was propaganda, as we said, we discussed before throughout it. Again, the NATO excuse, the Ukraine's controlled by a far-right country, the idea that Ukraine was somehow committing like genocide in the Donbass region. And again, you'd think if that was true, there'd be pictures, there'd be evidence, there'd be video, all of it. But it's nowhere to be seen. So, as always, like I say, this was a pretty long video, but to be honest, I think it had to address all this nonsense that Mr. Galloway has been spouting. And I've written to my MP, Dan Jarvis, to say, by the way, do you know what George Galloway's been saying? Do you know about all the money that he's taken? Do you think we should maybe look at sanctioning people like, this guy too? Just a thought. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-up donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.